Hey there, it's Mr. Attacker Drop Films. It's been a minute. Well, actually, I'm always posting random stuff, but it's always good to go back to Like a Dragon series. Be sure to check out my Patreon and my whole playlist full of Yakuza video essays if you like this one. And if you're a returning viewer, then thank you. Tiger drop that like button for me. So today, I want to talk about a little topic that I found pretty fascinating. And that's about a trilogy of Kiryu's bosses that I'm going to group together and call them the Rehashed Villain Trilogy. Now, it's not meant to be taken literally, of course, but we're looking back and reflecting on Kiryu's legendary final boss battles, right? It gets really easy to group them together. First of all, you got the original trilogy, and keep in mind this could be full spoilers the whole franchise ahead. But when you look at that original trilogy, right, you got a pretty cohesive line of bosses that build off each other. Nishiki's the Koi. The Koi hasn't become a dragon yet. You get Ryuji, who's a golden dragon. He's ferocious as Irizumi's looking directly at you. And then we have Mine, who's a Kirin, a creature who can supposedly slay dragons. So, as you can see, that original trilogy from Yakuza 1, 2, and 3, it's a cohesive lineup of villains that increase in danger and their ferocity as the entries go on, right? So that's the original three. And if you look at Kiryu's final three villains, well, maybe not at all as cohesive as that original trio, they still form a different sort of correlation between each other. First up, we got Yakuza 6 of Awami. Here's the Baoze Irizumi, a creature that can apparently eat dreams and is based from Chinese mythology, right? It fits in the context of the Song of Life story and what that Irizumi represents for being at the time Kiryu's final boss. And then you have Gaiden, the man who raised his name with Shishido, which is a direct sequel to Yakuza 6, of course, although made years later after Yakuza 7. But in that, we have Kiryu's next final boss, which was Shishido, a big lion man with peony flowers on him, a good ode to classic Yakuza. And, while not maybe a coherent or natural evolution, of course, because Iwami's was a different sort of mythological figure, and then you have Shishido's, who is just a big lion, an animal, but it still works because they all represent something different, which I'm going to get to in a moment, right? Like I said, it's not a cohesive streamline of an evolution of a boss getting worse than the next one or deadlier. More so at this point in Kiryu's career, they all represent a different kind of end result to a man's life and how he's going to go out. Case in point, Abina, who has a big, bloody Oni as his Irizumi, a bit similar to Daigo's, but he's looking right at you. He's just ferocious, he's violent, he's that kind of blood, crimson, violent, rageful red. He's vengeful, he wants revenge on the entire Yakuza for just being the cause of all this pain and suffering that's filled him up on the inside and has burst out into his Irizumi of being a dangerous and ferocious Oni. So there you go, right? Whether it's Awami's, Shishido's, or Abina, they all invoke a much more violent image that doesn't really have any noble background, right? So those three are more so about a very bloody point at the time of the series timeline, right? These kind of end results of the Yakuza of different ways. Awami was a guy who was disgraced by his father because his father didn't want him to be a Yakuza, that he became one. Shishido was a victim from a very young age, forced into the Yakuza and the criminal underworld by guys like Nishitani III and whatnot. So that's why he came to be as a lion, hence his name. One that is trying to claw his way out of being forgotten in the Yakuza. And then you have Abina, a man who shouldn't have anything to do with the Yakuza, but being a forgotten child of old man Arikara and his past, and having his mother die out due to the Yakuza and their interference in bloody clan battles. You get a guy like Abina who retroactively becomes a Yakuza because of his other bloodlust towards them. So that secondary trilogy of the end result of Kiryu's career is all about just either vengeance, desperation, or trying to cling on to some bigger title that doesn't belong to them, right? That's why it's not really coherent up front with the Irizumis, but when looking at them what they mean, they kind of have some sort of conjoined meaning. But that brings me to the main topic today. I know that was a bit of a ramble, but I had to kind of set the tone here. And that's why I want to talk about Kiryu's Rehashed Trilogy, from Yakuza 4, 5, and 0, because I'm just talking about release order of the games. And that brings me to, well, you saw the thumbnail. These guys, this trilogy of villains, are a rehash of sorts. You already fought Daigo in Yakuza 2, but he becomes the main villain for Kiryu in Yakuza 4. Well, I should just say antagonistic force at least, because they do make amends. But yeah, that's a repeat. And then Yakuza 5 is they bring back the Koi. A different design, of course, to represent who Aizawa is, but it's so fascinating for a game about dreams to just bring back the Koi. You know, it already speaks for itself, but it kind of works out here. I've talked about Aizawa and a lot of these guys in past video essays you can check out right here. And then you have Shibusawa, and I'm always surprised with Shibusawa, because you think fans would talk about him more, considering Yakuza 0 is such a popular game in the series, but, you know, that's the kind of thing when I'm talking about a rehash of villains. The Yakuza series follows a bunch of tropes, and you see that here of Shibusawa being a dragon again, like Ryuji, this time a green, or technically translation, Shibusawa is a blue dragon. But, once again, we have a dragon antagonist that came after a Koi in the previous game, Yakuza 5. So there you go, right? It's just interesting to kind of look at these rehash of villains and what they mean in the grand scheme of the series, and, you know, going back in hindsight and seeing how they worked out in the original games. Case in point, Aizawa, Big Fish Man. He's infamous for not knowing why he's the final boss for fans and just showing up to be a really great boss, but he just kind of shows up at the end, right? Of course, I like Aizawa. I've made a video about him in the past. I'm a Aizawa defender, so to speak. But then you have Shibusawa, who was just like Aizawa, only in the final stretch of the game where they kind of set up to be the final boss. Of course, Shibs, he is more of a schemer than Aizawa ever was. So you can see him pulling strings, and, you know, but both of these guys, they do show up prominently in the first quarter of the game. Then they kind of disappear until the final half, where they start making their moves and being more destructive and letting their violent tendencies out. So with that in mind, I do see that Shibusawa and Aizawa, while they are technically a rehash of the Irazumus you already saw, of course they have a new brilliant design made by the legendary Horitomo himself. Go follow him on Instagram. I still think it's just fascinating how these two rehashed villains popped up around the same time, same development era of Yakuza, you know, 2012 and 2015 respectively. And then to go back to Daigo. Now, Daigo, he does appear in a bunch of Yakuza games. He does show off his Irizumi ever since his appearance in Yakuza 2, where I first saw it. But I think he was the perfect choice for Kiryu as an antagonist in Yakuza 4. It just made sense. You already know him, he's established. And especially building off the Mine fight in 3, it just made sense for Daigo to be there, even if he was manipulated and he didn't make the best decisions. But I do think that he was a proper choice. And of course, seeing Kiryu, the Dragon Dojima, fighting pretty much his, you know, adopted son Daigo, the Fudomio, that sort of Buddha figure with one eye closed and one eye open, right? And he has a dragon around his sword. It just fits thematically as a pretty powerful fight. You know, two guys who were both technically the chairmen of the Tojo clan at one point. Now they're duking it out. Kiryu fighting his own adopted son, who he put in this position. It makes sense thematically, and of course their Irazumis matched because they matched in Yakuza 2, and that makes Yakuza 4 really nice. Subtle payoff for that storyline. That's why I really like the idea of this sort of rehashed trilogy of Kiryu right down in the middle of his whole storyline. You know, retroactively, of course, because, like I said, the original trilogy of villains are coherently put in place. Then you got the final stretch of villains that kept popping up because they kept bringing Kiryu back. So that's why we have Owami, Shido, and Abina. But then you look right down in the middle, right? You got Daigo, Aizawa, and Shibusawa, and it just works out pretty nicely somehow, right? That's one thing about this series that kind of gets overlooked. Because, yeah, we love the art, and every time there's a big RGG convention or livestream, they have all the art in a nice collage as a big wallpaper where everybody's sitting, right? That's always cool. And they even have some trailers every now and then promoting the Irazumis, but I still think that, not so much thematically, but just the raw power of Horitomo's art, sometimes gets overlooked by the fans. There's a lot of cool thematic storytelling that happens in hindsight when you go back and look at the games as a whole. That's why I think this rehash trilogy does end up fitting nicely, funny enough. And context of being the middle point of Kiryu's story, and the stories told here set the tone for the series going forward and what we have today. I mean, you wouldn't have the whole setup for Yakuza 6 and Manorisa's name and Infinite Wealth if it wasn't for Yakuza 5 alone. Then you have a story like Zero, that right there, that can be seen as either a really big flashback for Kiryu during his coma and why he's reflecting how he got there, or it can just be a decent, like, really cool way for fans to get into the series if you're new. So, a lot of cool ways that the storytelling of these games, while some fans may think some are better than others, of course, so they have their own problems with certain twists, when put together as a whole, it's a lot of really nice storytelling. It just ends up fitting well into the timeline and doesn't really hurt anything. And that's why I think that whether it's the original Yakuza villain trilogy, the Rehashed trilogy I'm highlighting today, or the final stretch of villains, it all comes together nicely. And I think that RGG and the writers lucked out in making it fit cohesively when just looking at all these antagonists, because, like I've highlighted today, they all had their own different motives for being villains, and at least even if the games themselves don't outright talk about new versions of Irazumis or new figures that nobody can really, infer about, because like a koi and a dragon and a Kira, and you can infer what they mean, but a lot of the other ones you kind of have to do some research yourself. But nonetheless, that was my ramble for today for Mr. Tiger Drop Film. Just a little highlight, I just want to talk about this, just the cool way that these villains end up working alongside each other in the grand scheme of things, and that even if a character may not have a bunch of screen time, sometimes the Irazumi, the color choice, the positioning of the Irazumi, if it's looking at you or looking off to the side, and what other details like weapons or flowers are on them can really just kind of tell everything you need to know about the character. That sort of visual storytelling that I love. But let me know in the comments, do you think the Rehashed trilogy makes sense for those villains, or what is your favorite batch of villains, or is there any other kind of trilogy you can make, out of order for these antagonists, and how they might correlate and tell some kind of other big story in Kiryu's, legacy? Let me know in the comments. I've been Mr. Tiger Drop Films. Check out my other videos and my Patreon. Supporting the channel will be a great help for future videos. I'm pretty sure to check out my Shinada show, out now, and there's a new episode coming out later in the month. And check out my Tanamura files if you haven't already. These are web series where I cosplay as Tanamura and Shinada respectively for your viewing pleasure. Until next time, stay sexy and I'll see ya. Mwah.